my brain. And so I looked at physical activity. And I use physical activity and not the term exercise, because exercise sounds really tough to do. When you hear the word exercise, you really don't want to do it. If the doctor suggests you be physically active, it sounds kind of a little, maybe you don't, not sure if you, but exercise, if he says that, oh my goodness, you're really not going to like that. So physical activity. And I realized that it helps to look at the simplest type of physical activity. Because if we can show that the simplest type of physical activity can help the brain, then it stands to reason that any other type of physical activity can have a similar effect. So I looked at walking. Simple, ordinary walking, which is something you can do at almost any age. And I looked at it in the same population of subjects, but I looked at a larger number of them, almost 300 of them. And this is an article from Sanjay Gupta's blog on CNN that shows that walking may slow brain decline. And that came out a year after the obesity study where we were showing the positive effects of walking on the brain. And so this is, again, another busy slide kind of showing all of the different factors that we controlled for when we were looking at the effect of walking on gray matter volume. And this was, again, using our voxels and our computer-based techniques. And again, we control for everything under the sun. We look at heart disease, we look at hypertension, we look at diabetes, we account for education, race, and we looked at the number of city blocks these individuals walked a week. And from that, we were able to calculate how many miles they were walking a week and study that effect on the brain. We also looked at the same variable in people who had mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease, because what I wanted to understand with my team was, could physical activity benefit the brain even after it's been stricken by Alzheimer's disease, and not just in individuals who are still cognitively normal. And again, we took 127 individuals with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, and we looked at all the different factors as well. And we had a lot of different steps, and I won't belabor the steps, but what we tried to understand was whether or not walking could improve gray matter volume and make your brain stronger in that sense. And then we took it a step further. I asked the question, okay, I have 20 years of follow-up data on these individuals. If I can show that walking benefits your brain, does that brain increase actually lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease? A lot of studies out there don't give you the full picture. They show a behavior, and they try to correlate it with the disease. They try to say, coffee consumption changes your risk for a disease, or walking changes your risk for a disease. But you have to look at the actual biological effect that behavior has to understand if it's actually going to alter your risk for a disease. And so that's what we did. So this is a brain, and it's got all these blobs on it, but these are not areas of shrinkage. These are not areas of atrophy. These are areas of the brain in 300 individuals that are larger when you walk a mile a day. Larger, a healthier brain in our 300 subjects that we looked at from these studies. And all of the areas of the brain that are larger when you walk a mile a day are areas that function in cognition, in your memory and learning functions. The prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobes, where we have the hippocampus. All of the areas that are at risk for Alzheimer's disease are stronger in individuals who walk about a mile a day. And these larger areas cut the risk for Alzheimer's disease 5 years after the scans were taken by 50%. So now we've shown in this community study that a simple behavior, walking, strengthens your brain, and in so doing reduces the risk for Alzheimer's disease. 50%. There is no drug out there which has the same effect. Not a single one. And this was published in the journal Neurology in 2010. Then we looked at the individuals who already had Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment. And what I'm showing here is one column which kind of summarizes the results I showed you on the last slide. And then I'm showing you that even in the individuals who have mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, these yellow, green, and red areas of the brain are areas of larger volume in people with Alzheimer's disease who walk a little less than a mile a day, about 1/8 of a mile, compared to their peers with Alzheimer's who didn't walk or weren't physically active at all. So even after you've had the disease, you can still strengthen your brain by walking. But unfortunately, you can't reverse the tide. You can slow it down, you can make it less of a ravaging process, but you can't cure it, which is why preventing the disease before it even begins is the goal we're trying to reach here. Having said that, however, the individuals who had Alzheimer's disease who walked, they still had memory loss, but their memory loss wasn't as fast as the individuals who were sedentary. Doesn't cure the disease, but it does reduce the cognitive symptoms and lessens the process somewhat. The bottom line is that a physical activity of walking gives you more brain volume, a stronger brain, and better memory. And again, we're just showing that same thing here. We're showing these red and blue lines on this graphic that shows that over 10 years, if you have Alzheimer's disease, your cognitive scores drop a lot more than if you're walking, in this case, 5 miles per week. So the kind of top bar, which is higher than the lower bar, kind of illustrates that. So in the normal group, like I said, walking about a mile a day, 6 miles a week, preserves brain volume over 10 years, gives you a 50% reduction in the risk of Alzheimer's 5 years later. And in the cognitively impaired group, it doesn't cure the disease, but it reduces the cognitive symptoms over the same time period. Now, some people ask, well, what if I don't like to walk? Who here doesn't like to walk? As long as you can find a physical activity you enjoy, do that physical activity. That's what I tell all of the patients I've encountered and all the people who have asked me about this, because a physical activity you enjoy is more likely to be the one you continue over the long haul. It just so happens that walking, which is the simplest physical activity, has been shown to improve your brain structure. So that felt much better, didn't it? Right? We showed that there's a physical activity you can do to help your brain. But your lifestyle doesn't end with the physical activities you participate in. It also has to do with the food you eat. And so in our study, we had a lot of information on dietary consumption of different types of foods. And so this is an article from Time which shows brain food. Eating fish may lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease. And so kind of rounding out and kind of going full circle, I looked at dietary fish consumption in the same population I've been talking about of elderly individuals over time. And I related that to brain volume to understand if eating fish can strengthen your brain and reduce your risk for Alzheimer's disease and have a similar effect on the brain as walking did.
Does that also apply to other types of dementia?
Well, in our study, we looked at Alzheimer's. So the question is, does the lifestyle factors I've talked about relate to other factors of the dementia? We don't know the answer to that, because in looking at our study, we looked at Alzheimer's disease, not because we think it's necessarily just the most important, but because it's the most common. So it's easier to study. So there are other types of dementia out there, frontotemporal dementia, there's Lewy body dementia, and that brings up an important point. People think that Alzheimer's disease is its own single thing, but it exists with a lot of other types of processes. So people who have dementia due to stroke can still have Alzheimer's on top of that. People with Lewy body dementia, which is a different kind of dementia that causes visual hallucinations, can have Alzheimer's mixed in with that. So a lot of these dementias are kind of mixed in together in our population. So a disease refers to an underlying biological process that creates a set of symptoms. When I talk about Alzheimer's disease, I'm talking about a physiologic diagnosis based on biological data. When I talk about Alzheimer's dementia, I'm talking about the symptoms that result from the underlying disease process. And when we talk about diseases that you can catch, those are communicable diseases. So the question was, can you catch Alzheimer's? No, you can't catch Alzheimer's like you catch the cold. Although, what we found in recent research in the New England Journal of Medicine from 2 years ago is that if you interact with individuals who engage in unhealthy lifestyle choices, you are more likely to engage in them yourselves. So if a lot of your friends smoke, you're more likely to smoke. If a lot of your friends are obese, you're more likely to be obese. And if it stands to reason that unhealthy lifestyle factors can shrink your brain, then you need to find a group of friends who don't engage in them. And that's one of the reasons why Daniel's a great friend to have, because he has the healthiest lifestyle of any person I've met. He and Tana, So I have a video here that I'm showing you. This is a spinning brain. We see green and yellow areas here. These are the positive effects of fish consumption. These are areas of the brain that are increased in people who eat fish once a week. Once a week. Baked or broiled, not fried. Baked or broiled. We set the bar pretty low, Daniel. I didn't want people to think that they had to eat fish 4 or 5 times a week. So I just looked at eating fish once a week versus not eating it at all. So So in our study, we had to ask people to recall what type of fish they ate and how to prepare it. And what we found is if we asked them questions that detailed, the measurements weren't reliable because people couldn't remember in a detailed enough way if it was, farm-raised or organic on average. And so what we could tell them and what we could ask them, they can give us the information, is how they prepared it. So baked or broiled fish is more likely to preserve omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are the main component of fish that's beneficial to the brain, and that's because it actually goes into the cell membranes of your neurons and the tracts of your white matter and makes them stronger. They're the building blocks. And so when you look at baked or broiled fish, the question is, what type. You're more likely to get the effect of baked or broiled fish in salmon, for instance, because salmon has the most omega-3 fatty acids.